Well, hi, friends. Welcome to episode 368 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian, just having finished my 19th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me on Facebook, on Threads, and on Instagram. You can find me at School Librarians United and on Bluesky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. And now for today's episode, Why Imposter Syndrome Plagues Our Profession, and my conversation with Amanda Chacon. Amanda Chacon, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you, Amy.
This is such a treat. Congratulations. This is your fourth appearance on the podcast. For listeners who are meeting you for the first time, would you give us a brief overview of the work you've done in school libraries, as well as how your career has taken a very interesting turn?
It has. So I started out way long ago teaching high school English, and then I transitioned into the school library. I was a school librarian for 16 years through all different grade levels, from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Last year, around September or so, I was very, very lucky to jump onto the Library Journal, train as a course operations manager for their professional development arm.
Wow. And I mean, that's a real change for you and your routine. You've got an excellent commute now, if I understand.
Yes, it's only a couple of minutes from my bedroom to my office. It is different, right? Because I'm so used to being around people all the time, and now it's quieter, but I'm enjoying the quiet for sure.
Well, and forgive me, but I always think about it in hours on the clock, right? So when I think about my job, I leave at 6 o'clock in the morning to avoid the rush hour. I get to work early because I don't want to be stuck in that traffic. That's time you can't get back. And then, oh, by the way, you have to get home. So now I think about all that found time because you're not spending it in traffic. And oh, by the way, how timely when you realize the outrageous price of gas. Depending on how you used to drive to work, if you're, filling up a gas tank, how nice that you didn't have to do that as much now that you work from home.
It's amazing. I'm not going to lie. It's amazing. It's also really great because I get to meet librarians from all over the world, actually, and collaborate and connect with them. So I get to hear a lot of things, and it's wonderful.
Well, and I appreciate that you worked so long in school libraries, that you have that perspective now, that you can move into a different role and know, based on your experience of being in the school libraries, and forgive me, being recognized for the incredible work that you do. You were School Library Journal School Librarian of the Year. You sort of, glossed over that point, but some of us will work much longer in this profession and never receive that kind of recognition. But can you just briefly go into what it is do you feel really sort of, and because there are a lot of folks looking at the winners of School Library Journal Librarian of the Year, and what do you feel really clinched the deal when it was your year?
It was a banner year for me, 2024, because I was also a Library Journal mover and shaker that year, as well as a Sam Houston State University Distinguished Educator. So it's just kind of all of a sudden. In terms of what clinched it for me, I would probably say the fact that I really focused very hard on making those community connections and having the library as a third space in my community. I mostly worked pretty much only worked in Title I schools. And so really having that outreach piece, it was required of us. It was not, oh, show up if you can to this after school event. We had to. And so I really embraced that and said, let me make it really relevant to my community and also highlight the library and all the amazing things we could do in the library.
Fantastic. So let me ask you, for listeners who are familiar with the podcast, it is no surprise that school librarians regularly reach out with their episode suggestions to the podcast. But I'll be perfectly honest, your topic suggestion of imposter syndrome last summer really surprised me.
It surprised me too. So what really kind of kicked that off, honestly, was winning School Librarian of the Year in 2024. And with that comes a lot of recognition. Sometimes recognition that you can't prepare for, that kind of attention, right? And as with all kind of public platforms, you're going to hear the supportive voices, and then you're going to hear the voices that are like, why her? Like, what is she doing that she deserves that, right? And so that really kind of kicked off imposter syndrome. I mean, I've always had it for a little while, but that really underscored it for me and made me want to look deeper into it, because it's like, if the Librarian of the Year feels like they're not doing enough, then what's going on in our profession?
Can I ask, you mentioned that you were also a classroom teacher.
Yes.
Do you remember ever feeling imposter syndrome when you were a classroom teacher?
No, I knew I wasn't the greatest teacher at first, right? When you first walk in the classroom, it's all about kind of finding your footing like a little baby duck. But I knew I was, I had a supportive team. I had people right next door to me that could support me, or I can ask questions. But when you are a school librarian, you are often the only one in the building and or multiple buildings, right? So it's super siloed. And I think that is what makes it more difficult for us.
Absolutely. No doubt conversations about our libraries, our collections, policies, programs, those are so much easier simply because we ourselves are not the direct focus of the episode. We're focusing on something external. However, in order to understand imposter syndrome and not sound like we're reading from a textbook, the conversation is likely going to be fairly personal and revealing. I do that on a near weekly basis. It doesn't bother me. You've been on the show before, but it always feels very like we're exposing something very raw and personal.
Well, we are, because we're taught, way back in library school, the whole concept of vocational awe, right? We're taught that we are doing a great service to our schools and our communities, and we really shouldn't question that because we have the honor of being able to do that. But with that vocational awe comes all these expectations and job creep and everything like that. And so it can be difficult to step back and say, hold on a second. This is actually making me feel like overwhelmed and like I'm not doing enough, even though I'm ticking off all the boxes I need to tick off on my evaluation.
Do you think it's possible that we hyper scrutinize ourselves and the job we do because on so many levels, schools are already looking for ways to cut back on their budget? They're looking to streamline what they do. They look around and see us in the library. And, as I tell many of my colleagues, it's not like somebody is going to cut math from the program this year. You don't have to worry about your job being cut if you happen to teach chemistry, or physics, because those are parts of the curriculum. I am not part of the curriculum. And so in some people's understanding, oftentimes antiquated understanding of what we do, it really does become a burden for us to have to prove ourselves day after day, week after week, year after year.
And that strikes right at the heart of it, I think, that when we have to constantly validate our existence, then we're going to start gaslighting ourselves.
I'm not going to lie. Anytime somebody describes this podcast as authentic or real, I really get excited. I was like, wow, mission accomplished. But in the case of your episode on imposter syndrome last year, I routinely caught myself reassuring my listeners who reached out to me that this episode, your original Imposter Syndrome episode, was my guest's idea. It was them doing the heavy lifting. I pressed record and you were off to the races. And I'm sure it was on some level cathartic. But I also recognize that it is such a fraught topic. The fact that you were not done wrestling with this professionally is part of this process, and that's why I'm here for it. I never want to take advantage of somebody's predicament, but I also want to provide a space for you to share today what you've been able to learn since you and I last talked.
Right. And I think that whole grappling with it, discussing it, kind of, tearing back the cloth, if you will, is what needs to happen so that people who listen, people who share these episodes can realize maybe I'm not experiencing right now imposter syndrome, but maybe I know somebody who is, or I might in the future have these feelings start to creep in. And then I know what to do now, hopefully.
Out of sheer vanity, do you remember listening to the first time you listened to your episode, Imposter Syndrome, for the first time? And it's okay if you never listen to it. That's okay too. But how did you feel listening to yourself talk about something as personal, deeply personal?
Well, first of all, it's always weird for me to hear my voice on any kind of recorded medium. I'm always like, who is that woman? She does not sound like me. So that was a bit jarring. But as far as the content, I thought it was fine. I did not feel uncomfortable. And I think that was just kind of a major shift within myself. I was just kind of done feeling bad about what I'm doing, feeling bad about myself. And so I say, you know what? I know I'm not alone because people are reaching out to me. I'm just going to just be open and vulnerable because what's the worst that can happen? People are going to, talk about me. Okay, they're already doing that anyway. But if I can do this and bring some light in any kind of way, or even just make someone feel a little less alone, then I think we're doing a good thing here.
So walk us through how you got from last summer, I think it was 10 months ago, last summer's podcast conversation to this year's survey, which you decided to create and share out.
So after the podcast, I also wrote an article for School Library Journal about imposter syndrome that, again, kicked in after I won the award. And I kept having people reach out to me privately, email, DMs, Facebook Messenger, just kind of sharing their own experiences with imposter syndrome, even just saying, hey, I've actually felt that way at times too. And it made me think like, okay, one conversation may not be enough here because people feel like they need to hear more. It's not obviously just librarians who experience imposter syndrome. It's every professional field, but we are unique in that we are so siloed, like we said before. So I didn't quite know how to grapple with that issue. Like, okay, how do I get more information about imposter syndrome in school librarianship? And so I did some research and saw that there wasn't as much research as I was expecting. And so I said, well, I'm just going to come up with a survey, very informal, not backed by any kind of research institution. My idea was to kind of collate these responses, see if there were any way we could spark further conversations. And those conversations, obviously done here on this podcast. I also wrote a follow-up article for Texas Library Journal and presentations. I also forgot to mention I'm an adjunct professor in library science at the University of Illinois iSchool, as well as Texas Women's University. So I knew these results could inform my instruction for library students as well, because we speak a lot about vocational awe in library school, but there's like a couple sentences on imposter syndrome. However, as we see in the survey, it's way more than a couple sentences worth.
Oh, I really got a behind the scenes look. Thank you for sharing. I truly, again, when we have this opportunity to press record and share this with listeners, I'm hoping that when listeners tune in, they feel seen. They feel, they identify with some of these, the triggers and the coping mechanisms, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But guide us through the questions you decided to include on this survey. I really feel like you cut to really the essence of what it is that triggers us and what kinds of things we are trying to do to mitigate those problems.
Right. So no survey is perfect. So what I did was I kind of just fleshed it out to who are you? Not, don't tell me your name or anything, but what's your current role? How long have you been a librarian? Are you certified? Are you degreed? Just kind of the basics to see if this is a problem throughout how long you have been a librarian. And then I wanted to really just kind of get all on the same page about what imposter syndrome is. And so that's when I went into the questions about, have you heard of it before? Have you encountered it before in any form or fashion? And kind of leading them through, okay, what does it mean to you? What is your definition of imposter syndrome? And then giving them just a dictionary definition of imposter syndrome and saying, is that something that you believe fits your idea of imposter syndrome? So really all just kind of getting on the same page about what it means, which is the perceived inability that you're to believe that when success is deserved or that you have what you have because you legitimately deserve it. So really just getting a baseline going before I start diving into the tougher type questions.
I'm so curious to know how you went about sharing this survey with library professionals, because you received feedback from, in addition to school librarians, but other library professionals as well who chimed in.
Yes. So library paraprofessionals, library students, teachers who work in the library. So it was really great. I had 165 responses, which based on, me doing my research, I realized that was actually really good. I shared it in Facebook groups of school librarians. I shared it on my social media, my Facebook, my Instagram, my LinkedIn as well. And I also posted it on TLA's Engage community board, just in case anybody else wanted to chime in. So it wasn't sent out in a formal way. It was more of an informal channel. Hey, if you feel like taking the survey, take it. So it was all self-directed.
Well, and you asked respondents for the triggers which set off a sense of imposter syndrome. And I'm sure that there are some outliers to these responses, but I'm sure that there are also some themes, some common themes when it came to what it is that causes imposter syndrome to hit us as hard as it does. What are those things that you found from your survey results?
So over 103 out of 165 said it was comparing themselves to other librarians. So that comparison culture overwhelmingly was the biggest trigger. From there, it moved into the other people in the school ecosystem that may not necessarily understand our role, like the administrators and the other teachers, just kind of understanding how to collaborate with them, but also educating them on our role as a school librarian.
Well, and I'm, friends, we've talked about this before, but comparison is the thief of joy. That when we do, and this is not isolated to just our profession, but so often this is a very human behavior when we as humans look around and compare ourselves to what other people have, whether it is monetary, it's physical possessions. And, I can honestly say this is one of the reasons that makes social media so toxic, because it puts in our faces what other people have or appear to have, and so much of human nature kicks in, and we start thinking, what am I doing wrong that I don't have that? And I feel like, this is where social media really does contribute, because it's so accessible to so many of us, and it's so curated and contrived. So unfortunately, a lot of this is relatable because there are a great deal of school librarians who spend time broadcasting and learning about one another on social media.
If you read through the responses, a lot of them mentioned seeing other librarians on social media doing all of these amazing displays, doing all these amazing programs, and they're like, I just want to make sure I don't burn the library down, or, my display is still 3 months old. And so I think that is probably the largest trigger, if you will, is seeing everyone on social media. So librarians, again, right, we're siloed. We don't necessarily have all these interactions with each other. And so social media is the way we do it. However, it's kind of a double-edged sword. We can get all this great information, inspiration from other librarians, but we can also get those feelings of, wait a second, she's doing all this stuff I'm not doing. What am I doing wrong, or what am I not doing enough of? But Amy, another surprising thing that I found, so respondents had an opportunity to type in specific situations if they wanted, or just more information about their triggers. Many of them mentioned going to conferences as a trigger for imposter syndrome. So it's not just the social media piece. It's, I went to ALA and I was overwhelmed, and I went to these sessions and I felt like I didn't belong. Or I went to TLA and I see all these people doing all these great things, and it just makes me feel like I can't do that, or I'm not a librarian if I don't do that. So that kind of surprised me.
I think it speaks volumes about our profession that so many people spent the time and thought to be as detailed in their responses for your survey. I am going to tell you right now, I've seen plenty of surveys where I'm just like, I'm not even interested. And I was like, I feel like and you were very kind to share with me the questions you asked, and to be able to see, obviously I don't have any idea who participated in your survey, but I did get to see the very detailed stories of people sharing their experiences. And I have to say, I could tell as people were pouring their feelings and experiences out into your survey, this did allow people to process some of these feelings to you, someone who has already been very forthcoming about your own experiences with imposter syndrome.
Right. And I think that's the only way maybe I could get authentic responses as well, is if I was open and honest about, hey, I'm struggling. I'm Librarian of the Year, but I'm struggling. Let's talk about it, And again, the survey was anonymous, so they didn't necessarily need to attach their name or anything like that to it. But I found that what was interesting is that some people did. They typed in the comment section, my name is so-and-so, here's my email because I want to talk more about this. And I think that exactly kind of strikes to the heart of it. We need to have more open, broader, larger, louder discussions about this so that we can start to combat it.
I want a group. I want a group that says you sit down because you're wrestling with something, and I wouldn't call it an addiction or friends of Amanda Chacon. Who, hi, my name is Amy and I have imposter syndrome. We can start to address it can really become crippling, because if you feel like there is this sort of helplessness, that if you don't feel you can find your way to that kind of elevated success that somebody else has had, well, what's the point in trying? But I'm looking at some of your responses, and yes, comparing myself to others was the highest number of respondents. But it was interesting because the next highest was interacting with administrators. And I mean, I'll be honest, we need to be at our most confident when it comes to communicating with the very people who could decide our jobs moving forward. And I don't mean to be that Debbie Downer, friends, but I think we've all had to wrestle with how we present ourselves to the people who oversee, evaluate, and decide the direction of our program. And so, I looked at that and said, wow, 43% of your respondents included interacting with our administrators as having that imposter syndrome. And I feel like, but I do know, because when I've had to get myself geared up for that meeting, you feel that anxiety, you feel that tension, that you feel like I need to put my best foot forward here however long this meeting is going to last. And yet I'm sure that there are some administrators for whom, after talking to them, we feel worse than we did when we walked in there.
I think this is another major contributor here to our profession. Again, we're siloed. We're often the only ones on our campus who do what we do, who know what we do. And then we're at the kind of the mercy of these administrators. And it's worth noting that many certification programs, degrees do not have any type of information on what the school library and school librarian can do for your school. So they have all this great stuff on curriculum with teachers, parents, but nothing about one of the biggest places on campus, which I find is a giant hole in their curriculum. And so it's up to us to fill that hole, which can be overwhelming. It can be fraught with anxiety. As you said, there's a lot riding on it: my budget, my job, if I'm in the rotation, if I'm in flex, if they pull me for tutoring students or what have you. And and another thing I'll be very open and honest about now, that especially since I don't, work in the school library anymore, I'm free from that. But there are administrators out there who are completely going off the rails when it comes to understanding what school librarians do. They're listening to these outside voices that are very loud, but have an agenda. And so they come in with these preconceived notions about libraries and school librarians, and it can be really hard. It's often running against a wall to speak with people like that. On the flip side, every now and then you'll get an administrator who embraces what you do and supports you and says yes. And I think that was a moment of growth for me, is that up until that point, I want to say it was 2018, so I'd been a librarian for like 8 years. Up until that point, I had not had an administrator who actually understood and supported what I did. When I got an administrator who took the time to understand what I did, she came in wanting to know more because she wanted to be a better principal. That really turned everything around. I was able to do all sorts of programming, connect with the community more, and really just feel like a valued member of the school ecosystem. Unfortunately, then she left, and then, somebody else came in, and thus the roulette happens again, right? Principals move quite frequently, at least here in Texas. They move around a lot. So constantly having to validate yourself to them, it is exhausting. But that advocacy is a giant part of what we do, because we have such a specialized role in the school ecosystem.
Well, and it's been pointed out to me by our Australian counterparts that those of us in the States have sort of done ourselves a disservice by having such a almost random nomenclature when it comes to what our titles are and the name of the spaces we oversee. Because if you go to Australia, every single person is a teacher librarian. They are teacher librarians because they're teachers who became librarians. There's no ambiguity. And they all teach in libraries. And there is no confusion. But when Australian academics try to go and study their equivalents here in the States, you get these indices, you get all these different names of the places where we work, the locations, what they're called. And it leaves our administrators open to interpretation. I know that this is only tangentially related to imposter syndrome, but if you appreciate, here in the United States, we don't have a standard of what we call ourselves or what we are called by our administrators. administrators. And our spaces are oftentimes also ambiguous because we do not call them by a standard name. It leaves it open to interpretation. So I've told people I work in a learning commons and I'm an information research technology specialist.
I don't think I've heard that one.
Yeah. And I almost didn't apply for the job. In fact, I didn't apply for the job for weeks because the word library and librarian didn't appear in the job posting. And so I appreciate that that's a hurdle, right? Because whoever is in the position of being the administrator who evaluates the program we are able to provide to our building, it really is an uninvited hurdle because there is that, we just don't know what it is this person does and what they should be doing. And that ambiguity oftentimes causes us to have to, defend what it is we do, irrespective of the name that has been assigned to the space and who we are.
That's interesting that you bring that up. I actually love that for Australia. I think that really just levels kind of the playing field. Even in your own district, it is different from school to school. Just like in my last district, it was different from school to school. So even the district couldn't get on board with what do we call these people? What is their actual job description? What is the space they're in? So yeah, that for sure can, confuse even a well-meaning principal. Oh, they're an information specialist. Well, they're going to work with technology, or they fill in the blanks themselves.
Exactly. Let's talk about some of the resulting behaviors, because you definitely asked that in your survey, that what happens when you are experiencing imposter syndrome? Because this, to me, I felt was people were very candid with you about how destructive this can be.
Yeah. So the follow-up predecessor to that was, how often do these feelings of self-doubt influence your daily work? So on a daily basis. And around 80% says in some form or fashion, it affects what they do on a daily basis, which to me was just staggering. I was not expecting that result. And again, kind of the largest one, going off that comparison culture that we've been talking about, the largest response was they hesitate to share their ideas or expertise, whether that's speaking up in a library meeting in their district, whether that's presenting on that TLA, ALA, any kind of conference, or even just sharing out on social media. They quiet themselves because they think what they have to say is not as great as what's already out there. And that was heartbreaking to see.
Did you happen to find a coincidence between the number of years that your respondents have worked in libraries and the incidence of imposter syndrome occurring?
Yeah, so it was actually quite interesting. You would think that newer librarians would feel imposter syndrome more. But the survey showed actually the opposite is true. The longer you are a librarian, the more it kind of entrenches in your daily work, in your daily thought process. And reading through the responses, I attribute that to they're going to more meetings, they're reaching out more on social media, following more librarians versus when they're a first-year librarian, you're just trying to survive. You don't necessarily have time to compare yourself. But then once you get into a groove, you're like, okay, I can start taking more things on. And then you start looking out at inspiration. And then that's when that comparison culture can start creeping in. So, and that's personal to me too, right? When I was a baby librarian, as we call ourselves, I was fine. I thought it was great. I was like, I'm doing amazing. Even though I really honestly was just trying to survive. And then once I started getting into my groove as a librarian, that's when it's like, am I actually doing everything I could be doing?
I have a thought. I think when survival, as you say, we were in survival mode. I mean, I talk about keeping my head above water because I felt like I was drowning in everything. My first 5 years of being a librarian. I never went to a conference because I had tried to take a day off, like when one of my kids was sick, and the disasters that would be waiting for me when I came back just wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it. And I think we're in such like on that day-to-day mode when you're just trying to get through and survive each day. You're like, hey, I'm crushing this. I'm walking out with a smile on my face. That's a great day. And then you get to be older, you've been in the profession, and expect more of yourself. And you've got some of those basics under your belts, and you realize, because you are looking around and saying, wait, I'm a 5-year veteran. I should be doing more. I should be better than I was when I started. And you start to, and we are, I'm so sorry to say this, but I feel like sometimes we are our own worst enemies because of how hypercritical we can be. There's no one else criticizing us, and yet we look at what we do every day and feel like we could be doing more.
I think that right there speaks to why we went into this profession. So again, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. We went into this profession because it's service-oriented. We are, generally speaking, people who care and people who want to help. But because of that, we're also highly empathetic, and we're susceptible to comparing ourselves to others. And so I see that quite often when I'm comparing, for instance, my library science students to some of these responses on the survey. And my library science students are just ready to go. They've got great ideas. They're so like energized. And then some of these responses on here are like, I've been doing this for 10 years, or I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's just getting worse. The expectations are getting more. The advocacy is just getting overwhelming, and I just can't wait to retire.
Well, oh my goodness. Well, and I think your design of your survey was really well thought out, because you offered your respondents an opportunity to respond with explanation, to write out an explanation. And that in and of itself gave your respondents an opportunity to really sort of consider their answers and be more, expressive in how they felt about this topic, rather than just sort of like hitting a radio dial and trying to get through a survey quickly. You gave them permission to express themselves in words, and it speaks a lot about the people who participated in this survey, that they took the time to provide as detailed responses when you asked these questions.
I was actually not expecting as many people to respond in these short answer or paragraph fields as did. And then, Amy, you can see some of them, entire paragraphs worth of answers. And so there's a lot that needs to be said, that they want to, get it out. And I think it's a matter of understanding, okay, yes, we are experiencing this. No, we're not alone, right? Let's maybe open up the doors a little bit more to helping each other out, since we are so isolated and siloed.
Well, and friends, this is now perfect time for me to share with you that this fall, we will be having another Imposter Syndrome episode. I'm excited that Dr. Steve Tatro has reached out to me, and we will be sharing an episode this fall about the writing that he has done for Knowledge Quest on imposter syndrome, because I think it's important, the more we discuss this, the more that we can recognize it when it's happening and help people identify why we do this to ourselves and what we can do to mitigate some of those feelings so that we aren't plagued by imposter syndrome as we do our jobs every day. I'd like to think the survey results helped in providing perspective and a better understanding of just how prevalent experiencing imposter syndrome can be for those of us who are working in the school libraries and library settings all over.
Yes, it really is super prevalent, as we all know, but many of us are not speaking about it. And a large component of that, based on my own experience and based on this survey, is interprofessional hostility. Hostility from other librarians making us intentionally feel like we are not enough. And I highlighted a couple of responses in the survey because it kind of proved my point in a way. One person wrote that if you are a trained librarian with an actual MLIS, you shouldn't have imposter syndrome. And I felt like that kind of blanket statement was just undermining what 88% of my respondents felt like, but also, what does it mean with an actual MLIS degree, right? There are many walks of librarians, and just because somebody has a degree does not necessarily mean that they are immune to feeling imposter syndrome. Another respondent said, I don't have imposter syndrome. I've never had imposter syndrome, and I don't understand how anybody could have imposter syndrome. And I'm paraphrasing that there. And I thought that, again, was very dismissive of the real struggles that we have as school librarians. And so kind of parsing through those responses, I noticed, again, this was through the ones where they check the boxes, but also type in, that many of them felt that other librarians were putting them down, unintentionally or intentionally. So there were some answers about older librarians in the district being dismissive of the younger librarians, the baby librarians. There were instances where people responded that they feel like they cannot present at conferences because what's the point, since it's always the same people presenting over and over. And so there's no room for me if I'm just somebody here with only, 200 followers on Instagram or whatever. There's instances in the survey responses of other librarians being, again, dismissive of their feelings, especially when you're meeting somewhere at a conference or at a district meeting or anything like that. Everyone seems so professional. Everyone seems to know what they're doing. And I'm sitting here like, wait a second, I don't know what I'm doing. And I feel like I can't say that because everybody else has this air about them that, well, why are you not doing that reading program? What are you talking about? So I think we need to maybe put a little spotlight on that for a second, that we are sometimes our own worst enemies, yes, but we're also getting it from our peers.
Yep. Noted. I just got back from ALA, and I was very mindful when I posted that I was going to ALA. I was very excited because I was presenting a session. Do I post when my sessions have been rejected? No, I have not. And here's the thing, my proposals get rejected all the time. And I'm thinking about this. I was like, I am very aware that when people post that they're presenting at a session, you can't help but feel that little spark of jealousy, of envy, that you're like, wow,
yes.
But again, I'm not broadcasting when my proposals have not been accepted. Let's just say it, rejected. When my proposals have been rejected, I'm not going out and broadcasting that news. And so it is fair to say that what we present is a very warped sense of our reality, because I have absolutely been rejected by ALA, by AASL. It happens. And it's soul crushing when it does, because invariably I go to those conferences and I'm like, I didn't get accepted to any of this, but here we are. So I will say, and I'm not lying, I created a platform that I couldn't get rejected from. How about that?
Creating your own space.
Exactly. Please be aware that when this podcast was created, I had an audience of myself. There was nobody else, but I think listening. It was just me, season 1. Please don't listen to it. But I also realized that the only thing that stood between anybody else being on the show was me. And if I can extend that invitation to people, especially individuals who have ideas that they'd like to share, there is no committee, friends. There is no committee. Obviously we recycle a lot of presentations that do get shared at conferences because that's just being smart, and you can use double dip, but we all have something to share. And just to sort of put that little plug out there to anybody who's tuning in right now, there is no committee. There is no rejection process. There is an opportunity for us to shine a light on the amazing work that we do every day. And I would hope that for anybody who feels like they're not getting heard, they're not getting seen at these conferences, consider taking a look at the FAQs in the show notes, because we all have something to share. And that invitation has been extended in every episode. Please consider reaching out to me, take a look at the FAQs, and let's have a conversation, because I'd love to share what we do every day with listeners.
What you were just describing about the applying for conferences and then getting rejected is competition. So they only have so many spots. There's only so many awards to go around. And so we start to get competitive with each other. And I think that can also lead into that interprofessional hostility, right? It's like, well, I want to present at ALA, and wait a second, so-and-so is presenting at ALA, but I was rejected. Well, why was I rejected? And then you start questioning, okay, well, maybe I'm not good as so-and-so. Maybe so-and-so should just take over the whole profession, or, it can spiral into things, right? But we compete with each other instead of supporting and giving grace to each other. So yes, there are sometimes the same people presenting over and over at conferences. However, that does not mean, just like Amy, you should keep trying. Even if you are getting those rejections, every rejection is a learning experience in some way, or maybe it just didn't fit the theme that year, honestly, because some of them, and I know TLA has themes, and if yours doesn't quite fit the theme, then it's not the year for you. So kind of moving into, okay, we have all these feelings, we have issues within the profession when it comes to imposter syndrome. What can we do about it aside from talking about it?
So I'd love to know, because you did include this on your survey, what are some ways that we have learned to combat imposter syndrome?
So I think, first of all, just recognizing that it exists, right? We saw from the survey that some people even had issues just acknowledging that it is a problem. Recognizing that it exists and that it's extremely prevalent in our profession, and that we should be having these conversations about it. Also, actively practicing self-care, understanding that the idea that we are in a service-oriented profession does not mean we give away all pieces of ourselves to everybody else, that we save pieces for ourselves, and really understand we don't want to experience burnout. We don't want to crash out at a district library meeting. So practicing that self-care and pulling yourself back when you feel like you are getting overwhelmed with social media. If you feel like you're getting overwhelmed with some kind of Facebook group that is doing all these great things, hiding them, protecting your peace, as they say. Something else we can start to do, or continue to do, I should say, as a profession, is intentional inclusion. And in my role right now, I have a great opportunity. I am able to shine a light on librarians who are doing amazing things, but they may not necessarily be the ones that have the most Instagram followers or are presenting at all the conferences. But I know they are doing great things because I know them personally, or I know them through connections that we've made networking, or I've seen a presentation here or there, or a paper here or there. So intentionally passing the torch on, as we say. If you are someone who presents at TLA all the time, maybe ask one of your fellow librarians to present with you. If they are someone who maybe isn't comfortable, or maybe they haven't done it, that bringing them into our horseshoe, as you will, kind of gathering our arms around them and understanding just because you don't get accepted for all these conferences doesn't mean you don't have anything to share. You are doing XYZ program. People would love to know about it. So I think you should share. And broadening your scope. So if you are someone who is like, well, I've applied for all the awards, I've applied for all the conferences, and I'm not getting accepted for anything or getting recognized for anything, think outside the box a little bit, because maybe your platform isn't meant to be those things. Maybe your platform is teaching a course for School Library Journal. Maybe it's being on Amy's podcast. Maybe it's being a mentor for other librarians in the field. So it may not necessarily be something like loud and showy, but it's still contributing to our profession.
But I think part of what is going to help people address this in their own lives is recognizing the struggle that the two of us have had. We've been very vocal and vulnerable in sharing this. And the hope is that when people see how this has manifested in other library professionals and what we have done to grapple with that, I think it's important for us to be able to put perspective on what we experience and what we do with how that, affects our daily work and the goals that we're going to be set moving forward. And I think success looks different for a lot of people. And I think we cannot define success because, forgive me, you've been on the cover of a magazine.
That is so true, though.
And
it's so true.
I think what is more important is that we have established ourselves as a professional and a valued member of our school. I think we need to bring this back to a scale that is far more manageable and look at what the validators that we have within our reach on a daily basis. Did I make a difference to the people I work with today? And as long as you can say yes, that's a win. And I think that we have to see our success in those manageable ways rather than this culmination of career, and being on the cover of a magazine, forgive me, because that is a standard that is far too infrequent. But again, looking at those successes, I know at my job, given what I do is so varied, I document, and I document what I do, and I document it through a nice Google spreadsheet. But I also include the name of the teacher I work with or the department, because at any given time, if I need to call upon what did I do yesterday, what did I do last week, I want to be able to say with specificity, I helped this team, I helped this team, I helped this teacher, I did this with this grade level. I think those are the kinds of successes which are accessible and ones that we can identify within our control. And am I doing a better job this year than I did last year? Hands down. Absolutely. So I think we need to look at the criteria by which we judge ourselves and recognize that wins come in all different shapes and sizes.
I always tell, this really just resonates with me. I always tell everyone, I can speak to and my library students, if you keep the kids as your North Star in everything you do, you will not go wrong. And if that library is a place where they can step inside and feel welcomed, you are doing exactly what you need to be doing and feel great about that, right? You're exactly right. Being on the cover of a magazine is not a barometer of success by any means. It was a surprise to me too. Trust me. And again, it's like it didn't stop me from experiencing feelings of imposter syndrome. But I knew, in the trenches of the day-to-day library work, right? If a kid could come into my library and feel happy and welcome, then I was doing exactly what I was put on this earth to do.
There you go. Well, and friends, before we go, make sure that, because I do realize there is a lot of compare and despair. There is a lot of social media, which really can bring you down rather than give you that you're there looking for ideas, but it manages to have a very much of the opposite effect. Please surround yourself with a PLN, a virtual PLN of people you have networked with who can fill you with the kind of encouragement and support that you need to hear, whether it's after a long day, you're getting geared up for something that's important to you. Because there are people in this profession who you have networked with, people who do support and love you and are not going to look at your whatever it is that you feel you fail to do. And those come in the form of chat groups. Those come in the form of having these informal PLNs of people you might have worked with, or you've networked with at a conference, but reaching out and having those authentic, raw conversations with somebody who truly gets you. And I'm going to encourage, oftentimes you make those connections and keep them going through chat and sort of on your drive home from work. So, and definitely start to see the friends you have in this profession who will raise you up rather than tear you down, who will make you feel like you are making the progress you need to professionally to make a difference without that extraneous validation, which is infrequent. And let's be fair, it's not always equally distributed.
That is so true. Yes.
All right. Amanda Chacon, would you please, I know there are friends listening to this conversation, grateful for all that you've shared. Is there a way that you can best be reached if somebody wants to contact you?
Yes. So I mostly post on Instagram now just because I found it just too overwhelming to post to all the things. So I'm on Instagram under OpenBookAmanda. And then you can find me on LinkedIn under my name. And then we'll throw in my email address in the show notes as well. Please reach out. I've had people reach out before just to spark conversations. And most librarians I've met love to speak to one another. And so let's talk.
Absolutely. Hey, it's the summertime. Have a fantastic summer. Stay cool. I know you are in a fairly warm part of the country, but I hope you're enjoying your summer. And thank you for sharing with us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Amy.
Friends, it takes a lot of courage to share our personal stories, and I'm always grateful when library leaders share their experiences so that we in our listening audience can apply these learned lessons to our own lives. Building on these 2 episodes, I am very excited to announce that Dr. Steve Tatro will be joining us this fall for a conversation, Combating Imposter Syndrome. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. If you're curious to know how often your state or country has been featured on the podcast, simply click on the link that can be found in our show notes, search title, author, state, and country, and do a Command F search. I hope this is the year you consider being a guest on the show. Please visit the FAQs in every episode and you'll realize just how easy it is. We all have something to share. Make 2026 your time to shine. The topic of our next episode is Teaching with AI and my conversation with Dr. Christopher Harris. I hope you will tune in.